What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video. Occasionally, I try to drop some competitive wisdom in my videos, whether it's from my own experiences or things that I have witnessed, and nothing compares to what we're going to see today. So just take a seat and imagine with me here for a minute. You're in the semifinals of a Pro Tour. You're sitting across from a Hall of Famer and an all-time great in the game of Magic. You're in a dominating position in the match. You are moments away from winning and locking up the semifinals and moving on to the finals, where you have a very, very, very good chance of taking down the event and crowning yourself a Pro Tour champion, only to realize that you have made a critical error in that match and going from absolutely winning and moving on to your tournament life being in danger. And that's what we're going to look at today, because this actually happened on July 30th, 2017 at Pro Tour Hour Devastation. Game 5 of the semifinals we have between Paulo Vitor Damarosa and Yam-Wing Chung, which is an all-time moment in Magic history, just unfortunately for the wrong reason, and kind of the lesson that we are going to learn today. And of course, we're going to get to when we get to that part of it. But of course, we're going to give some background on the match and kind of what is going on, so we can kind of have a better understanding exactly what is going on. So a little bit of background on Pro Tour Hour Devastation. At Pro Tour Amonkhet, we had Teamer Marvel versus the Mono Black Zombies deck, and Mono Black Zombies ended up winning the event. But from that Pro Tour and the subsequent GPs and other qualifier events going on, Aetherworks Marvel kind of dominated the standard format. You were able to play an Ulamog on turn 4, and you were casting it, so you were going to basically double Stone Rain your opponent, and they were either going to have to find a way to deal with a 10-10, depending on the deck they were, or if they countered it, you basically literally sent them back to the Stone Age, and you were more than likely going to be able to spin Marvel again to hit another big Eldrazi and just kind of put your opponent in the woodshed. So after, I believe, a few GP events, Aetherworks Marvel ended up getting banned, and we kind of get to the metagame for Pro Tour Hour Devastation, where it was expected to be kind of wide open, but not really, because when we find out that the deck that both players are playing here today in Paulo Vitor Damarosa and Yam-Wing Chun is the Ramanop Red deck, which comprised 25% of the field. The Ramanop Red decks, while they kind of vary between player to player and from team to team, the basic idea of the Ramanop Red deck is to play cards like Earthshaker Kenra and On-Crop Crasher. In the early games, they're just nice haste creatures that are going to get in damage past your opponent's creatures and, hit for 2, 3, 4, 5 damage every turn, while also playing some other small aggressive creatures to kind of chip in that early damage and trying to finish your opponent off with cards like Hazoret the Fervent and Chandra Torch of the Defiance. While, again, like the numbers kind of varied between decks, these were kind of the, essentially the staples of the deck, and honestly some of the best cards in the deck. On top of this, the Ramanop Red deck got the name from the card Ramanop Ruins, where you could pay 4 mana, tap it, sacrifice a desert, and deal your opponent 2 damage. This is kind of a way that you could, end up going hellbent, attacking with Hazoret the Fervent, and then, using your mana on your lands to end up getting essentially an uncounterable 2 damage on your opponent. Also, you need to play Sunscorched Desert to ping your opponent. This is like a way that you could, again, have a little bit of reach in the deck without, taking up spell slots and getting to play essentially more creatures, and you were kind of okay with flooding out, because if you ever found a Ramanop Ruins, you were essentially going to be able to do 2, 4, 6 damage with those Ramanop Ruins. And that kind of takes us into the match that we're going to be looking at. So Yam-Wing Chun, just a little bit of further context to what's going on. Yam-Wing Chun won Game 4. Down 2-1, has now tied it at 2 apiece, and will be on the draw against an all-time great player in Magic's history, and hoping to knock off Paulo and get one step closer to being crowned Pro Tour Hour Devastation champion, playing what has been the deck of the tournament so far, as both players after day 1, which actually being Paulo and Seth Manfield, were undefeated with the deck, and even the only 10-0 player from the event was also playing Ramanop Red. So this could potentially just decide the whole tournament. This is a big moment for Yam-Wing Chun, because again, as I kind of outlined, a lot of people would kill to be in that position to kind of show that they could knock off a Pro Tour champion, and again, an all-time great of the game. So with that being said, I think with enough context and rambling, let's go ahead, let's get into the match between Yamwing Chung and Paulo Vitor da Mona Rosa, Game 5, semifinals of Pro Tour Hour Devastation, and unfortunately, we're going to be learning our lesson today. So here we are for Game 5 of Pro Tour Hour Devastation, the semifinals between Paulo Vitor da Mona Rosa, Yamwing Chun. Again, Yamwing Chun has just won Game 4. They finished sideboarding. They're shuffling up, getting ready to deal out their opening hands for Game 5 of the event. Of course, before we hit play on the video and we kind of give a little bit of insight and kind of see what exactly is going on and what led to, unfortunately, the lesson we're going to learn this week. If you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me, where we post a lot about the Modern and Pioneer content, as well as some other longer form videos. So if any of that interests you, please consider subscribing. I enjoy doing these videos. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy seeing all the support and everything that we get on the videos. So I would greatly appreciate it if you're not already subscribed that you do so, and we can continue kind of pumping out these awesome videos. But, you know, with that said, let's go ahead. Let's take a look at the match here.
Paulo's got so many matches of playing the mono red mirror here, just back to back.
So as we kind of stated, the Remnant Up Red deck is the most played deck in the field. It is a quarter of the decks, and currently, you know, has the potential of putting one of them into the finals of the event. Sam Pardee, I believe, is the other finalist in the event. Ended up playing the green-black Constrictor deck, which is like focused on putting like counters on all your creatures. And, you know, with the way that Constrictor worked, honestly, with some of the other cards that came out of like the Amonkhet block, it kind of worked pretty funny, honestly.
It looks solid. Again, he needs a
but, you know, we see Paulo's hand. We see some of the cards that we talked about earlier. We saw, like, Earthshaker Kenra. There's, like, the Pian Alar, which is, like, a card that would show up from time to time. You'd also see, wouldn't be surprised to see cards like Bomac Courier, which is, like, a way that the red deck could, like, draw cards, even though it was on a 1/1 creature that more than likely was only ever going to see, like, 2 or 3 cards. I've seen some Bomac Couriers get massive, and by massive, I mean, you know, have, like, you know, 4 or 5 cards underneath of them. So see his hand, we see a Braid, Shock, 2 lands, pretty good. The Sunscorched Desert that we talked about that could ping our opponent.
You can't mulligan that hand. You have
and so you know, basically just hoping that the hand kind of comes together, because, you know, notably missing some 1-drops, which I believe Paulo's deck list has quite a bit in, actually. And then Yamwing Chung looks like he's keeping, and unfortunately we don't get a look at his hand. Hopefully they'll show it up on the sideboard. But yep, Paulo leaning on Mountain Go, and then we see the Falcon Wrath Gorger, which is essentially like a 1-mana 2/1 in this deck. It ends up, you know, getting to attack for 2 damage on the second turn of the game. I think it gives like your vampires like madness or whatever, and I think that, you know, there are some vampires that like maybe could come up, but I don't know if it ever really like comes up, honestly. Like, I think there's like very few situations where, you know, Falcon Wrath Gorger would actually come up. I think it's just being used as essentially like a Jackal Pup without downside. So, you know, gets shocked, Sunscorched Desert goes and pings Yamwing Chun, and then we end up seeing an Earthshaker Kenra come down hitting for 2. So, you know, Paulo coming out pretty aggressive. You know, we saw shocked the turn 1 play from Yamwing Chun, and then immediately gets with the Earthshaker Kenra getting to do its thing, not really waiting to, you know, get it down to where it can stop a creature from blocking, just immediately getting in the damage. Most of these red decks really aren't blocking, and some of the, honestly, like the mono red like mirror matches and stuff are actually pretty cool. So continue on.
And most importantly, Paulo did
Yamwing Chun draws his card for a second turn. It looks like he also has a Sunscorched Desert in his hand and an Earthshaker Kenra, so we could potentially see just kind of, you know, the reverse of like Paulo's, but instead he leads on a mountain.
It looks like he just has
Not exactly sure. It's been a while since I've, you know, obviously thought about like this standard format. It was like a crazy time back then. And we see just plays an Earthshaker Kenra, does have a Sunscorched Desert, and is just going to get in there and attack. Paulo draws his card, draws a Falcon Wrath Gorger. You know, definitely not nearly as good on like the third turn of the game, but you know, we're gonna ping our opponent again and then play a Pia, get a Thopter token.
Fantastic here.
Wow.
Pia being a nice kind of mana sink too, and then also allowing your, you know, sacrificing the Thopter to force a creature to not be able to block and hopefully get in a little bit more damage than normally would have. A lot of these red decks, you're just like attacking and then, you know, playing another creature as like a follow up, and like that would kind of be on blocking duty. So not really crazy to see something like Pia Nalar, where it could almost guarantee that you're going to have a blocker, plus getting to sacrifice a Thopter to then make sure that your opponent's creature can't block. So, Yamwing Chun, thinking. You know, we know we have the third land. We see the Ramen Ruins, one of the most important cards in the deck. And we see like an on-crop crasher as well, which is probably what's going to come down here.
And that will make it so that the on-crop crasher wouldn't die.
Right.
And then we could potentially see it exerted,
He has played on Crop Crasher.
He could also
which isn't like amazing because then it doesn't get to untap, but you know, you do almost guarantee that you get in damage and you're going to trade off. In the worst case, I would say, or maybe best case, you're looking to trade off with like Pia with either the on-crop crasher or the Earthshaker Kenra, and continue to push damage and virtually just leave Paulo with like a Thopter token. Or being able to, I believe Earthshaker Kenra is a 2/1. So, I mean, I believe that, I'm actually not sure. It's been so long since I've actually seen this Pro Tour. There's just a lot of mono red and like Blue-White God Pharaoh's Gift. And then doesn't actually end up attacking past the turn, which I don't think is necessarily like the worst thing in the world, but is pretty bad when your opponent just has like removal spell and a removal spell, or just has like grip full of removal spells, and it looks like another Abrade plus a Ramen Ruins. Kind of okay with like forcing your opponent to block with the Earthshaker Kenra. Getting in for 3, Paulo definitely putting Yamwing Chung on the back foot, as you should be, you know, on the play, just kind of, you know, like who's the control, who's the beatdown sort of thing. And I think Paulo recognizing that he has the potential to just be the beatdown deck.
It'll take about 17 minutes to find out what he draws. Okay.
So in here we see like Incendiary Flow, which is kind of the card that we pointed out in the, you know, preamble to all this, that kind of differs between both decks, because Paulo really wasn't playing the Incendiary Flow, which is kind of nice for Earthshaker Kenra, because whenever, if a creature would die, it gets exiled instead of going to the graveyard, which is, you know, where we kind of see like Magma Jet later show up, would just be like a good way of getting rid of like Earthshaker Kenras. And we see, looks like it's going to play Incendiary Flow and actually hit the Earthshaker Kenra, pointing out the play that we just talked about, where just killing the Kenra and making sure that your opponent can't get it back. Of course, Paulo has 4 lands in play, so definitely at least a lot, you know, I guess as close as Yamwing Chun is, but, you know, still like a threat. It's still a thing. It's a 4/4 that's going to make your biggest thing not be able to block and put you in a lot of pressure. But Yamwing Chung down to 8, Paulo at 16, you know, still at a very high life total, and we see Hazoret the Fervent, one of the kind of key cards in this matchup. I mean, Paulo in a pretty good position. Kind of as Paul has pointed out, there's 3 deserts in play for Paulo, and he has a Ramen Ruin, so with every land drop, he's going to be able to throw one of those deserts at Yamwing Chun and, you know, essentially have him at 2 life, unless Yamwing Chun can, you know, of course, kind of get in more damage and hopefully try to race Paulo at this point and figure out a way to kind of like turn the tide. And I believe like the gods from the set are like weird, because we would see like Devotion kind of being the thing, you know, in Theros block, and with these gods you had to meet like certain requirements. Hazoret far and away being like one of the best ones, just because you had to have 1 or less cards in hand to be able to have her be active, and it ended up being, you know, probably the best one. Like Rona seeing like play here and there, but definitely Hazoret being one of the better ones.
Okay, but he's opting for the Hazoret.
So plays Hazoret, more than likely wanting to play defense, but, you know, again, not really like super surprised, because he thinks that maybe he can race, you know, running lands plus the creatures.
But also, Paulo's going to have
Which is
to
kind of
track
like,
them.
sorry for the cut. Apparently my microphone decided it didn't want to record anymore, so
Okay, but
let's go ahead. We're back. Young Wing Chung plays the Hazard the Fervent. We'll kind of go through this here. Young Wing Chung basically debating on whether to attack with the Hazard the Fervent or leave it back to block. We kind of debate for a minute, and it looks like we're leaning towards getting aggressive and putting Apollo to 11. We have the Collective Defiance in hand. So, like, we're going to be able to deal 3 damage with that card, and then also hit another 5. Hit for another 5 damage. So that's 13 damage right there. Potentially meaning that with the burn spell off the top, we are able to kill our opponent, because we can just pay 3 for the Collective Defiance, deal 3 damage to our opponent, and then something like Incendiary Flow could help us deal the last 3 points of damage. Looks like Paulo draws a Bomat Courier, so just kind of, you know, a little whatever. I mean, it does technically put lethal in play for the next turn, and potentially lets Paulo get an extra card, or 2, depending on if he attacks before the cracking the Bomat Courier. But just thinking with the Chandra's defeat in hand, it's not going to get rid of the Hazard the Fervent, which is kind of the big deal on the board currently. Getting to attack.
That's exactly what
You
he's
know,
going to do.
more than likely going to get in for 4. I mean, Young Wing Chung could technically have like Shock or Magagent, something like that. Of course, we know that he has the Defiance, so this is just going to get in for 4 damage, put Young Wing Chung to 4. And now we're essentially looking for Incendiary Flow for the win, or another creature to maybe potentially come with the board. And he actually does draw the Incendiary Flow. So right now, as it stands, Young Wing Chun has lethal. He can deal 3 with the Collective Defiance. He can deal 3 with the Flow. Deal 5 with the Hazard the Fervent. That's 11 damage. Game over. See you later, Paulo. We're on to the finals. So, again, to note, the Hazaret can only attack if you have 1 or less cards in hand. Can attack or block if you only have 1 or less cards in hand. So, essentially, what Young Wing Chun needs to do, fire off one of these spells, or both spells, pre-combat, you know, at our opponent, attack, and more than likely that'll be the game. So let's see what happens.
It's an Incendiary Flow off the top.
And look at this.
No, you can't attack. You can't attack. He has only 2 cards in hand. Is he in his combat step? What's going on? He can't attack. Is he? That causes the game.
Yeah. So instead of casting either of the spells main phase, so we could attack with the Hazaret, Young Wing Chung kind of in what I think a lot of Magic players are kind of agreeing to do is, like, without giving any additional information, just kind of go to your attack step, attack, play all these things in your second main phase. So then that way, you know, your opponent hopefully does something before you end up doing something. And unfortunately for Young Wing Chun, this works in like 90 to like 95% of situations. And this is the one where it doesn't, because obviously, as we had pointed out multiple times, the Hazaret can only attack or block if you have 1 or less cards in hand. And with how Magic rules work, you know, essentially, since Young Wing Chun went to attack and then he couldn't attack, the judge kind of reverses it to, I believe, the beginning of combat. So technically, Young Wing Chun could activate the Hazaret to get rid of one of these cards, deal 2 to Paulo, and then be able to attack with the Hazaret. The only problem with that is then he would be exactly 1 point short, because he gets to deal 2 damage with either discarding the Defiance or the Flow, hit for 5, which would then be 7 damage, and then Defiance or Flow, whatever card's left over, is only going to be 10 damage, putting Paulo to 1, and then he is dead on board. So from this point, this is like the second part of the lesson, is like when you make a very critical error, because Young Wing Chun had this game all but won. I mean, we know that there's exactly enough burn in his hand and enough damage in play, and Paulo has nothing. Of course, Young Wing Chun doesn't know that, but Paulo has nothing relevant to kind of deal with like what's going on. So, you know, again, this is like a game that Young Wing Chun should have won, but of course we are now having to play from a position where we've had the match won. It was over, and now we need to continue playing. And as you saw, just kind of like a little bit, I'm not even going to call it like necessarily like a kind of like just losing the cool. You know, Young Wing Chun kind of losing his cool. I mean, just had the semifinals basically won, and now has to figure out, like, okay, how do I proceed from here? How do we play on? So let's go ahead and let's take a look at it. So we're now at the beginning of combat. Yang Wing-chun again could attack with the Hazoret, even though discarding probably isn't like all that great, because we can just deal 3 damage with the Collective Defiance. Technically putting Paulo to 1 isn't even necessarily like the worst thing in the world, even though it does like technically put him dead on board. He can just like throw the burn at Paulo's face, and then between some other combination of cards like Sunscorched Desert can come down, ping Paulo for 1. So Yang Wing-chun's going to kind of go through some different things. Of course, the Defiance, you can pay an additional mana into it to escalate it, and then he can end up dealing damage to Paulo and burning him as well. Or dealing damage to Paulo, and then deal with one of the creatures as well. So then, this way the Hazoret is able to block and get rid of one of the creatures on the board and end up going to 3. And kind of as Paul will go through with it, because I basically watched the rest of this match because my microphone sucks, essentially has the ability to...
Wow.
I think even like talking about potentially like activating the ability to be able to attack. But I don't know if Yang Wing-chun would necessarily want to do that. And of course, I think we end up seeing a play kind of where he's just kind of going through some different avenues of like how he could block, things like that. We'll kind of skip through some of this. So this is an Escalate Collective Defiance.
I think he's going to go for the Thoppers.
And then deal damage to the Thopter, deal damage to Paulo, leave the Gorger, and then the Bomat Courier, and then he's going to be able to block the Gorger, take a hit from the Bomat Courier, go to 3, and then a land doesn't actually kill Paulo, or doesn't kill Yang Wing-chun, which Paulo does end up drawing a mountain, which means that he could activate the Ramen-up ruins, but also means that if Yang Wing-chun can't win the game next turn, that Paulo is just going to be able to throw a desert, and then a land is going to be lethal, and then potentially likely another burn spell will be lethal, which, is... We're in an interesting spot in the game, because again, it was over. It was basically over, but now we need to figure out a way to win the game, and then this also gives Paulo a chance to kind of navigate and try to win the game as well. So we see Chandra's defeat, we see Mountain go, so the Hazoret is not going to be able to get in, and then we pass back to Yang Wing-chun.
I'm trying to figure out what he can draw here.
Another Collective Defiance would be great. We see the Incendiary Float, and then I believe that is a... believe that was like a Soulscar Mage. Yeah, so drew Soulscar Mage. So he could play it out
as a damage effect,
and then
throwing it with Hazoret.
right?
or I guess that too.
So now he has. Wait, okay, don't do that yet. Let's not do it. Let's not
Yeah.
make the same mistake twice.
Don't even touch
So
that Hazoret yet.
could throw whatever, deal 2, put Paulo to 6, and then put him to 3. It does force a block,
Probably just play a Soulscar Mage and attack with Hazoret.
but we're gonna see like
Forcing a chump block, and Paulo's going to chump block. here.
playing that, and then probably just getting in for an attack. I mean, more than likely going to block. A way that Yang Wing-chun does do this is if Paulo doesn't think that Yang Wing-chun has another 3 damage burn spell, he could attack with the Hazoret, and then if Paulo doesn't block, the game is over. So I don't think I necessarily hate this, even though he could have thrown the Soulscar Mage and then attacked, and then still kind of been in the same position where Paulo's dead to a lot of other things. Ends up blocking with a Bomat Courier.
Okay, you know what? This also makes sense, actually.
So then he can activate Ruins, and then if he draws like Earthshaker Kenra, then the thing can't block. At this point, I think I'd like firing the burn spell at the Falconwrath Gorger just to kind of make sure, but then you're also dead to a land too, so you're kind of in a lose-lose situation, even though Yang Wing-chun could just kill the Falconwrath Gorger. As long as Paulo doesn't draw a land or like a haste creature, which is a lot of his deck, then Yang Wing-chun can untap and then he's going to draw a card, and then he can, you know, use runes or use the Hazoret to deal 2 damage, and then attack for 6, which would be lethal. So we see Yamwing Chung, like we're in the critical juncture of this game. Like we're in the last few turns. Like either Paulo's going to win on his next turn, or Yamwing Chung very likely wins on his turn. I would say almost as likely as Paulo is to win on his turn. So Flo go for the Gorger and essentially set up a turn where between Hazoret attack or activation of Ramen Up Ruins, there's going to be like nothing left. Find Chandra, exile a card, choose not to play it, or actually not even a choice because you're not going to be able to cast it, and then deal 2 damage to his opponent. Ending the match and giving Paulo another appearance in the finals and ultimately winning the event. And as I found out, like while researching kind of like the event a little bit to get some backstory on this, Paulo ended up actually becoming Player of the Year after this event. Obviously winning that match, which he by all purposes like should not have won, to then, you know, taking it and beating Sam Party in the finals to actually give him enough points to pass Marcio Carvalho for the Player of the Year race and taking Player of the Year away from him. So, I mean, really just kind of like crushing 2 players' dreams in, you know, the course of like an hour, like in the course of like 2 hours, we'll say, of just like crushing 2 players' dreams. But, you know, that's kind of like the point of this. I mean, yeah, this is like a very, I would say a very important lesson or a very important thing that's happened in Magic's history, but it does paint like a very good lesson as well as, you know, understanding that, you know, if you understand that you have a winning position or that you are winning the game or are about to win the game, it's nice to just take a deep breath. You slow down. You don't try to rush through it. You know, honestly, who cares if your opponent, you know, in the off chance that your opponent's like, oh, you slow rolled it or whatever, because I would imagine more than likely at the Pro Tour, especially at like this level, you know, if you end up taking an extra 10, 15 seconds, heck, even if you take a full minute, I don't care. There's so much money on the line. There's so much riding on this sort of game that you just need to take a minute, relax. Heck, even if you're just playing at F&M, just take a minute, breathe, make sure that you double, triple, quadruple check how many times you have to, and go and do the thing. Go and execute it, and make sure that you are doing it in the right way or the way that you think is the right way at the time to accomplish it, because you definitely don't want to end up in a situation where you lose a game that you basically won. The second part of it too is that if you kind of fail to slow down, stop, or, you know, maybe you end up sequencing something wrong or it doesn't go the way that you plan out, just kind of finding a way to calm yourself down, you know, especially if you get worked up by it, or you kind of get like that anxious feeling of like, oh man, I think I screwed this up, I might lose. Finding a way to kind of regroup and, you know, compose yourself and get back in the moment and say, okay, you know, we're playing from this position. What's a way that we can win the game? What's a way that I can kind of limit my opponent's outs of winning this game? You know, and while again we can look back and say like Paulo didn't deserve to win this game, or got very lucky, whatever the case may be, you know, that is Magic as a whole. Sometimes you just need to get lucky, and in Paulo's case, I mean, to me, like probably top 3 player of all time. And when you give a top 3 player of all time, you know, that chance to win the match, especially like the way that Yamwei Chun did, you definitely can't do that. That's just a big no-no, I would say, because it'll kind of end up going like that. But, you know, that's kind of the idea, the lesson and everything. So let's go ahead. I'll go back to the face cam and kind of wrap this up as nicely as I can. So to kind of wrap it up and kind of what we're talking about here, is very important to just sometimes slow down, assess the situation that's going on, and just slowly take your time through it. There's no rush to do things, even if it, you know, there's time on round, whatever the case may be. You know, in situations like that where the game is more than likely going to be won or lost on that turn, it's important to kind of take your time and make sure that you evaluate situations correctly, or, you know, for what knowledge you have, assessing them correctly so that something like that doesn't happen. And then if the worst case scenario happens where maybe you're wrong, or maybe you end up rushing through and trying to do something that maybe you couldn't have done, or doing things in an order that you shouldn't have done them, being able to recompose yourself and focus on doing the right thing from that point on, and ensuring that, you know, you don't end up actually losing the game that maybe you should have won. And that's kind of the big takeaway from it, and something that's super important, because in any game where you play competitively, whether it's something, you know, more of like a mental game where you're playing like chess, or you're playing Magic, or if it even comes to like sports, or you're playing football, basketball, baseball, you know, being in the right mental state is always going to help you, and is always going to prevail in kind of those tight situations. You figure out what people are made of, you know, not when they're winning, but when they're losing a game, or when they're, you know, put in a place maybe they're not used to being in. And I mean, most of the time it involves being in kind of like a losing position, because it's easy to be positive, it's easy to be happy when you're winning and you're controlling the game, but it's another thing to, you know, be losing and figure out like kind of where your mindset is, or in this case, being in a position that you are winning, and then, you know, all of a sudden kind of being at parity, or even on the back foot now, in a moment's notice. And that's kind of the big lesson here, is to kind of work on that mental toughness, and just kind of taking your time through tense situations, through very important situations, and then also being able to kind of recognize that, and hopefully not get to the second part of it. But if you do end up getting to that point where maybe you do things a little too quickly, to just kind of reevaluate, find ways to calm yourself down, try to relieve as much of the anxiety as possible, to then just, you know, refocus and try to close out the game. And that, again, that's kind of the important thing in all of this. So, but yeah, that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed my little lesson for today. If you did, please leave a like on the video. Comment down below if there is another match throughout history that we can look at to kind of learn something from, or if there's just something that's entertaining. I will have a poll kind of going up in my community tab pretty soon, kind of working on a little bit more of a longer term project, or longer term video, kind of going over, you know, pretty in depth, because I like doing a lot of the research for some of these old Pro Tours. Absolutely some of my favorite era of Magic, just because I remember watching like every single Pro Tour, every GP, every Star City Open, you know, from this time up until COVID. And it was just a lot of fun. It was a great time playing Magic then. So, you know, there'll be a poll going up in the community tab. So if you want to participate in the poll, or, you know, just be a part of the channel, anything like that, be sure to subscribe, ring notification bell, all that fun stuff. You know, it's a great, easy, free way to support me and my content. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. I want to do it by the end of the year. I think we're going to easily do it by the end of the year. Now I want to try doing it before Regional Championship DC. I think that'd be kind of really cool to kind of get into, and then looking to do some special project stuff like at the regional in DC. So, you know, if you want to be a part of it, subscribe, ring notification bell, all that fun stuff. Leave a comment down below what you enjoyed, maybe what we can do to improve, things like that. And yeah, that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all in the next one.